The rain was coming down like bullets when Curtis pulled up to the bus stop and told me to get out. "Maybe walking home in this storm will teach you some respect," he said, not even looking at me as I stepped into the downpour. I watched his taillights disappear into the darkness, clutching my soaked purse and smiling through the lightning. He had no idea I'd been planning this moment for 3 months. When they filed the missing person report 2 days later, I was already on a private jet to Switzerland. 4 years later, when my helicopter landed at his failing construction site, Curtis Richards went white as his workers pointed up at the sky. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to that night, because what Curtis thought was my lowest moment was actually my greatest victory. It was October 15th, 2019, and I had just turned 32 that morning. The storm had been building all day, one of those violent autumn thunderstorms that tears through the Midwest like nature's own revenge. I was standing at the downtown bus stop on 5th Street, completely soaked, my birthday dress ruined, my carefully styled hair plastered to my skull. But I wasn't crying. I was calculating. Curtis had left me there as punishment, or so he thought. Earlier that evening, we'd been at his mother's house for what was supposed to be my birthday dinner. Mabel Richards, a woman who had made hating me her personal hobby for the past 6 years of my marriage to her son, had spent the entire meal listing my failures as a wife. "Margaret doesn't appreciate how hard Curtis works," she'd said, cutting into her roast beef with surgical precision. "She just sits around that house all day, wasting his money on her little hobbies." My little hobbies. As if the freelance graphic design work that had been quietly funding our emergency savings account for 3 years was some kind of adorable time waster. As if the financial planning I'd been doing had kept us from bankruptcy twice. As if my careful budgeting wasn't the only reason Curtis could afford his weekly poker games and expensive tools. "Mother's right," Curtis had said, not even glancing at me. "You need to start showing some gratitude for the life I've given you, the life he'd given me, the life where I managed every household expense, coordinated every social obligation, and somehow remained invisible while doing it all. The life where his friends Luke Smith and Andy Rogers treated me like their personal waitress at every gathering. The life where his mother openly discussed how disappointed she was that Curtis hadn't married Lauren Patterson, the doctor's daughter, who got away." I had smiled and nodded through dinner, just as I'd been doing for years. But inside, I was reaching a conclusion that had been building for months. I was done. The storm outside Mabel's house had been perfect cover for what came next. Curtis had been drinking heavily, his usual response to his mother's criticism of everything from my career to my inability to produce grandchildren. When it was time to leave, he was belligerent and spoiling for a fight. "You embarrassed me tonight," he'd slurred as we drove through the torrential rain, "sitting there like a bump on a log while my mother tried to help you understand your responsibilities." Help me understand. As if being systematically diminished and criticized was somehow educational. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I'd replied, calmly, watching the windshield wipers struggle against the downpour. "Sorry I feel that way?" His voice had risen to that dangerous pitch I knew so well. "You should be sorry for being so ungrateful. You know what? Maybe you need to learn some humility." That's when he'd pulled over at the bus stop on 5th Street, right in the heart of downtown where the buses stopped running after 9 p.m. It was nearly 10:30. "Get out," he'd said, his eyes glittering with cruel satisfaction. "Walk home. Maybe the exercise will help you think about how good you have it." 12 miles. In a thunderstorm. In heels and a dress. It was supposed to be my humiliation. My breaking point. The moment that would finally make me grateful for his benevolence. Instead, it was my liberation. Because here's what Curtis didn't know. I had been planning my escape for 3 months. Not from our marriage, though that was certainly part of but from the entire life that had slowly strangled me into invisibility. 3 months earlier, I'd made a discovery that changed everything. Curtis had left his laptop open, and I'd seen the emails. Not from another woman. Curtis was too lazy and self-absorbed for an affair. No, these emails were worse. They were from his mother, his friends, and even his sister Ginny, all discussing the Margaret problem, how to make me more compliant, how to break my stubborn streak, how to convince me to quit my design work and focus on being a proper housewife. They'd been strategizing about my life like I was some kind of difficult project to be managed. But the worst part wasn't the manipulation. It was the casual contempt. The way they discussed me like I was too stupid to notice what they were doing. The assumption that I would simply accept whatever they decided was best for me. That night, I'd started planning. Not revenge. Revenge would have been too simple, too small. I'd started planning transformation. I had more going for me than Curtis or his family realized. My little hobby of graphic design had earned me over $80,000. In the past year, money I'd been quietly funneling into a separate account Curtis didn't know about. I'd been working with international clients, building a portfolio that could take me anywhere in the world. I'd also been learning. While Curtis spent his evenings drinking beer and watching sports, I'd been taking online courses in business management, digital marketing, and investment strategies. While he'd been dismissing my intelligence, I'd been developing skills he couldn't even comprehend. Most importantly, I'd been documenting everything, every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every attempt to diminish me. Not for legal purposes. I wanted a clean break, not a messy divorce, but for myself. To remember why I was making this choice. So when Curtis told me to get out of the car that night, I wasn't a victim being abandoned. I was a strategist implementing a carefully planned operation. My soaked purse contained not just my wallet and keys, but a waterproof envelope with cash, a prepaid phone, and a fresh passport in my maiden name, Margaret Smith. I'd been waiting for the right moment to disappear, and Curtis had just handed it to me gift-wrapped. As I stood in that storm, lightning illuminating the empty street around me, I wasn't thinking about the 12-mile walk home. I was thinking about the overnight train to Chicago I'd be catching in 3 hours. I was thinking about the morning flight to Zurich that would begin my new life. Most of all, I was thinking about the look on Curtis's face when he finally realized that the quiet, compliant wife he'd taken for granted had played him better than he'd ever played anyone. The storm was just beginning. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of getting wet. 3 months before that storm, on a sweltering July afternoon, Curtis had made the mistake that changed everything. He'd left his laptop open on our kitchen table while he went to take a shower, his Gmail account logged in and displaying an email chain that would shatter any remaining illusions I had about my marriage. The subject line read, "The Margaret Situation, Family Meeting Notes." My hands froze over the keyboard. I should have closed it, walked away, preserved whatever dignity remained in our relationship. Instead, I clicked. The email was from Mabel Richards to her inner circle: Curtis, his sister Ginny Rogers, and his closest friends Luke Smith and Andy Rogers. What I read in those messages made my stomach clench with a mixture of rage and cold, calculating clarity. "She's getting too independent," Mabel had written. "This design business of hers is making her think she doesn't need Curtis. We need to nip this in the bud before she gets any ideas about leaving." Ginny had responded with surgical precision. "I agree. Curtis needs to put his foot down about the work. No wife of a Richards man should be running around playing businesswoman. It reflects poorly on the family." But it was Luke's contribution that truly opened my eyes. My wife Lauren used to have career ambitions too. I convinced her that supporting me was more important than chasing her own dreams. Now she's perfectly content managing the household and helping with my practice. Curtis just needs to be firmer. Andy had chimed in with his own wisdom. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The key is making her feel like the work is her choice to give up. Create enough obstacles, enough criticism, enough family obligations that she'll eventually quit on her own. Then she'll never resent you for making her stop. Curtis's response had been the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. You're all right. I've been too soft. Time to remind Margaret where her priorities should be. The birthday dinner at Mom's will be perfect timing. Margaret always gets emotional about family stuff. They had been planning to break me, systematically, methodically, with the cold efficiency of people who saw me not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. Once I started looking, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every family gathering where I'd been subtly criticized, every suggestion that my work was taking time away from Curtis, every casual comment about how successful wives supported their husbands' ambitions rather than pursuing their own. It wasn't accidental, it was coordinated. I scrolled through months of emails, each one revealing another layer of manipulation. They discussed my schedule, my client meetings, my income, information Curtis had been gathering and sharing with his family like intelligence reports. Margaret made $12,000 last month, one email read. That's more than Curtis made from the construction business. She's getting too confident. Too confident. As if confidence in a wife was something dangerous, something to be managed and contained. I found detailed plans for undermining my work. Mabel scheduling family emergencies during my important client presentations. Ginny calling with urgent needs right before my deadlines. Curtis picking fights the night before big meetings, ensuring I'd be emotionally drained and off my game. They'd been sabotaging me for over a year, and I'd been too trusting, too focused on keeping peace, to see it. But their emails revealed something else, something they didn't fully understand, the true state of Curtis's business. While they'd been focused on diminishing my income, they'd been ignoring how much we actually needed it. Richard's construction was failing. Curtis had been lying to everyone, including his family, about how bad things had gotten. The poker games, the expensive tools, the casual spending, it was all being funded by my design work. Without my income, we would have lost the house 18 months ago. I screenshot every email, every financial record I could access, building a comprehensive picture of our real situation. Curtis wasn't the successful provider his family believed him to be. He was a man whose pride was so fragile that he'd rather destroy his wife's confidence than admit he needed her help. That night, after Curtis came out of the shower and casually closed his laptop, I started a new email account under my maiden name, Margaret Smith. I forwarded everything to myself, creating a digital trail that would remind me, on the days when I might weaken, exactly why I was making this choice. Over the following weeks, I took inventory of everything I'd built while Curtis and his family had been dismissing my work as a hobby. My client list included 3 international companies, 2 Fortune 500 corporations, and a growing roster of small businesses who paid premium rates for my brand development work. I wasn't just good at what I did, I was exceptional. My designs had won industry awards Curtis had never bothered to acknowledge. My strategies had increased client revenues by measurable percentages. My reputation in the design community was solid enough that I could work from anywhere in the world. While Curtis struggled to manage a small construction business in one city, I'd been building a global brand from our kitchen table. The irony was staggering. They'd been trying to convince me I was lucky to have Curtis, when the financial reality was exactly the opposite. He was lucky to have me and too proud to admit it. That realization shifted everything. This wasn't about escaping a bad marriage. This was about escaping people who saw my success as a threat to their worldview. People who would rather see me diminished than acknowledge that their assumptions about gender roles were outdated and wrong. I started planning not just an exit, but a transformation. If they wanted to underestimate me, I would use that underestimation as a weapon. I researched business opportunities in Europe, where my design aesthetic and marketing skills would be valued differently. I identified markets where American expertise in digital branding was in high demand. I began learning basic German and French through online courses, telling Curtis I was taking hobby classes to improve myself. He encouraged it, thinking I was finally focusing on self-improvement rather than career ambitions. He had no idea. I was preparing to build something far beyond his comprehension. I also started working out, not for vanity, but for strength, physical and mental. I took self-defense classes, telling Curtis I wanted to feel safer when he was working late. I opened investment accounts, learning to grow the money I was quietly moving out of our joint finances. Every skill I developed, every plan I made, every dollar I saved, it all happened while Curtis and his family continued their campaign to make me smaller. They thought they were winning because I stopped arguing with their criticisms. They didn't realize I'd stopped caring about their opinions entirely. By early October, I had everything in place. A substantial war chest in my private accounts. A portfolio strong enough to secure clients anywhere in the world. Documentation of every manipulative conversation, every coordinated attack on my confidence, every lie Curtis had told about our finances. Most importantly, I had clarity. I understood exactly who these people were and what they thought of me. The sad part wasn't their cruelty. It was their assumption that I was too weak or too stupid to recognize it. They'd given me the gift of absolute moral clarity. I owed them nothing. All I needed was the right moment to disappear. A moment when my absence would be dramatic enough to make a point, but clean enough to ensure they couldn't follow me. Curtis handed me that moment on a silver platter, wrapped in a thunderstorm and tied with his own arrogance. As I stood in that rain 3 months later, I wasn't thinking about their betrayal anymore. I was thinking about my freedom. After discovering those emails, I became an actress in my own life. Every morning, I woke up next to Curtis and smiled the same smile I'd been giving him for 6 years. I made his coffee exactly how he liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream. I asked about his day, his projects, his mother's health. I played the role of the devoted wife so perfectly that even I sometimes forgot I was performing. The key was understanding. My audience. Curtis wanted a wife who was grateful, slightly helpless, and completely focused on his needs. So that's exactly what I gave him, while quietly building an empire he couldn't even imagine. "Honey," I said one morning in late August, buttering his toast with practiced precision, "your mother mentioned that Ginny might need help with the church fundraiser. Should I volunteer?" Curtis looked up from his phone, pleased. "That's thoughtful. Of you, Maggie. Mom always says you could do more for the family." Maggie. He'd started calling me that years ago, claiming Margaret was too formal. I hated it, but I smiled and nodded like it was endearing. "I just want to be useful." "Good girl," he said, patting my hand condescendingly before returning to his screen. Good girl. As if I were a well-trained pet receiving praise for sitting on command. But while Curtis saw compliance, I was gathering intelligence. Every family event became an opportunity to study my opposition. Every conversation revealed more about their plans, their weaknesses, their assumptions about my capabilities. My days developed a careful rhythm. Mornings belonged to Curtis, making breakfast, discussing his schedule, playing the supportive wife. But once he left for the construction site, I transformed into someone he'd never met. Margaret Smith, international brand consultant. I worked from our converted spare bedroom, which Curtis dismissively called my craft room. He had no idea that from this small space, I was managing projects across 3 continents. While he struggled to coordinate local construction jobs, I was developing marketing strategies for companies in London, Berlin, and Tokyo. My client calls happened during his work hours. Video conferences were scheduled around his routines. International collaboration occurred while he watched television, completely unaware that the woman bringing him beer and pretzels was simultaneously closing deals worth more than his annual income. The irony was delicious. Curtis often complained about wives who didn't understand business, never realizing he was married to someone who understood it better than he did. I built systems to maintain my double life. Separate phone lines routed through my laptop. Business correspondence forwarded to an address Curtis didn't know about. Financial transactions carefully timed to avoid his attention. Every detail managed with the precision of a covert operation. Because that's exactly what it was. Curtis's family made excellent unwitting informants. They spoke freely around me, treating me like furniture that occasionally needed instructions. Their casual conversations revealed everything I needed to know about their dynamics, their finances, and their plans. At Sunday dinners, I learned that Luke Smith's medical practice was struggling with malpractice insurance costs. His wife, Lauren, had been forced to take a part-time job at a dental office, despite his previous claims about her being perfectly content managing their household. The irony was lost on everyone except me. Andy Rogers bragged about his real estate investments, but I noticed the stress lines around his eyes when he thought no one was looking. A quick online search revealed 3 properties in foreclosure proceedings. His expertise in managing wives apparently didn't extend to managing money. Ginny Rogers, Curtis's sister, spent these gatherings complaining about her husband Omar's lack of ambition. She wanted him to demand a promotion at the accounting firm, where he worked, but Omar preferred steady income to risky advancement. Their marriage was a constant power struggle disguised as domestic harmony. Even Mabel Richards, the family matriarch, wasn't as secure as she pretended. She'd been living off Curtis's father's life insurance for 15 years, but those funds were dwindling. Her criticism of my career wasn't just about control. It was about fear that I might become more successful than her son. These people who spent so much energy managing my life were barely managing their own. While playing the dutiful daughter-in-law, I quietly investigated Curtis's business finances. What I discovered was worse than I'd suspected from the emails. Richard's construction wasn't just struggling, it was systematically failing. Curtis had been taking deposits for projects he couldn't complete. He'd borrowed against equipment he didn't own. His tax situation was a disaster of missed payments and mounting penalties. The business that Mabel constantly praised as evidence of her son's success was actually a house of cards held together by my design income and desperate financial maneuvering. I found unpaid invoices dating back 8 months, supplier accounts and collections, insurance policies that had lapsed due to non-payment. Curtis had been robbing Peter to pay Paul for so long that he'd forgotten which debts were which. The most damning discovery was a second mortgage on our house that Curtis had taken without my knowledge, forging my signature on documents I'd never seen. The money had disappeared into the construction business, meaning our home was collateral for his professional failures. Every family dinner where Mabel criticized my financial contributions became more surreal. They were literally depending on the income they were trying to convince me to abandon. While Curtis spent his evenings drinking beer and watching sports, I used the time to prepare for my new life. I enrolled in online courses under my maiden name, studying international business law, European tax structures, and global marketing trends. I joined professional networking groups, attending virtual conferences where industry leaders discussed opportunities in emerging markets. I learned about business incubation programs in Switzerland, startup accelerators in Berlin, and consulting opportunities in London. Most importantly, I studied languages. German through Duolingo during my lunch breaks, French through evening podcasts while Curtis watched television, Italian through morning apps while he slept off his hangovers. Every new phrase I learned was another step away from the life they'd planned for me. Curtis occasionally noticed my headphones and language learning materials. "Still working on those hobby classes?" he'd ask with amused condescension. "Just trying to improve myself," I'd reply, which was absolutely true, just not in the way he imagined. The hardest part wasn't planning the logistics of my escape. It was managing the emotional weight of living a lie. Every kind gesture from Curtis carried the knowledge of his betrayal. Every family gathering included people who were actively plotting to diminish me. Every conversation required careful monitoring to maintain my cover. I started seeing a therapist, paying cash to avoid insurance records Curtis might notice. Dr. Patricia Chen helped me understand that my anger wasn't destructive. It was clarifying. The rage I felt wasn't something to overcome, but something to channel into determination. "You're not leaving a marriage," she told me during one session. "You're leaving a conspiracy." That perspective changed everything. I wasn't abandoning a relationship. I was escaping people who saw me as an obstacle to their vision of how the world should work. My departure wasn't selfish. It was necessary. I practiced emotional detachment, learning to observe Curtis and his family like an anthropologist studying an unfamiliar culture. Their assumptions about gender roles, their casual cruelty, their absolute confidence in their right to control my choices. It all became data rather than personal attacks. By September, I could listen to Mabel's criticisms without feeling hurt. I could watch Curtis dismiss my opinions without getting angry. I could endure their condescension with perfect composure because I knew something they didn't. I was already gone. I was just waiting for the right moment to make it official. 2 weeks before my 32nd birthday, I discovered the final piece of their plan. Curtis had forgotten to close his laptop again. Or maybe his arrogance had reached the point where he didn't think I was smart enough to understand what I was reading. Either way, the email thread titled Birthday Intervention Plan laid out their complete strategy for my emotional destruction. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. They'd been coordinating for months, each family member assigned a specific role in what they called reality adjustment therapy. The birthday dinner at Mabel's house wasn't just another family gathering. It was a carefully orchestrated intervention designed to break my spirit once and for all. "The key is making her feel isolated," Mabel had written. "Every woman at the table needs to reinforce how unusual and selfish her career focus is. We'll share stories about successful marriages where wives prioritize family over personal ambition." Ginny had volunteered to bring up my childlessness. "I'll mention how Lauren Smith has been talking about trying for a second baby, and how fulfilled she seems since focusing on family. Margaret's biological clock is ticking. We need to make her feel like she's wasting her prime years on pointless career pursuits." Luke had committed to sharing medical perspective on work-related stress in women. As a doctor, his words would carry authority when he discussed how career pressure could damage a woman's health and fertility. "I'll recommend she consider stepping back from work stress for her own well-being," he'd written. Andy's role was to question the legitimacy of my business entirely. "I'll ask detailed questions about her client base, tax obligations, and business registration. Most women doing freelance work don't understand the legal implications. I'll make it clear that she's probably operating illegally and could face serious consequences." Curtis's job was to deliver the final blow. After his family had spent the evening undermining my confidence and questioning my choices, he would offer the solution. "I'll suggest she take a break from work to focus on our marriage and starting a family. I'll frame it as romantic, wanting to provide for her so she doesn't have to worry about money anymore." The email chain included backup strategies if I proved resistant to their initial approach, escalation tactics, ways to make my work life more difficult, plans to sabotage my client relationships if I didn't voluntarily step back. Reading their coordination was like discovering that people you'd trusted had been plotting your assassination, except instead of killing your body, they wanted to murder your spirit, your independence, your sense of self-worth. But the conspiracy went deeper than I'd realized. The email threads revealed that other family friends had been recruited into their campaign. People I'd considered neutral had been quietly gathering intelligence and reporting back to Mabel. Sarah Chen from Curtis's poker group had been asking her husband questions about my business practices, then sharing my responses with the family. When I'd mentioned a difficult client situation at a barbecue, thinking I was just making conversation, Sarah had reported every detail to Mabel as evidence of my inability to handle professional stress. Even our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, Lauren's mother, had been monitoring my work schedule and reporting on my excessive business calls. The times I'd stepped outside to take international client calls had been logged and interpreted as evidence that my work was taking over our home. They'd turned my entire social circle into unwitting surveillance. Every casual conversation had been mined for information. Every moment of frustration or uncertainty had been documented and weaponized. The isolation hadn't been accidental. They'd been systematically cutting me off from anyone who might support my career ambitions or question their traditional family values. When I'd mentioned wanting to join a local business networking group, Ginny had convinced me it would be too time-consuming. When I'd considered taking a graphic design course at the community college, Mabel had scheduled family emergencies every night the class met. They'd been managing my social environment as carefully as a prison warden managing inmates. The most damaging revelation was how they'd been undermining my business behind my scenes. The coincidental family emergencies that always seemed to happen during my important client presentations weren't coincidental at all. They'd been deliberately scheduled to sabotage my professional reputation. Andy Rogers, with his real estate connections, had been spreading subtle rumors about my business practices among local entrepreneurs. Nothing actionable or legally problematic, but enough to create doubt about my reliability and professionalism. He'd been poisoning potential local client relationships before I even knew they existed. Curtis had been more direct in his sabotage. I found evidence that he'd been intercepting some of my business mail, claiming packages had been misdelivered when they contained important contracts or payments. The delays in project timelines that I'd attributed to postal service problems had actually been manufactured by my own husband. Most shocking was the discovery that Mabel had been calling my clients directly, claiming to be concerned about Margaret's health and work-life balance. She'd presented herself as a worried family member, suggesting that I was overwhelmed and might need to scale back my commitments. 2 clients had terminated contracts early after these calls, and I'd never understood why. They hadn't just been trying to convince me to quit my career. They'd been actively sabotaging it while I tried to maintain it. Their emails revealed how they saw me, and it was more insulting than I'd imagined. They'd created a psychological profile that painted me as delusional, stubborn, and fundamentally confused about my role in life. Margaret has always been prone to grandiose thinking, Mabel had written. Even as a girlfriend, she had unrealistic ideas about her capabilities. Curtis has been too patient with her fantasies. Ginny had been more clinical. She shows classic signs of what my psychology textbooks called role confusion. She genuinely believes she's as capable as a man in business, which is why gentle correction hasn't worked. She needs firm reality checks. Luke had added medical authority to their character assassination. From a health perspective, her obsession with work success could indicate underlying anxiety or depression. Women who reject traditional fulfillment often struggle with undiagnosed mental health issues. Andy had been the most direct. Bottom line, she's selfish. She married Curtis but wants to live like a single woman with a career. You can't have both without neglecting one, and she's choosing to neglect her marriage. They'd pathologized my ambition, medicalized my independence, and moralized my success. In their minds, any woman who wanted professional achievement was fundamentally broken and needed to be fixed. The final emails in the chain outlined their vision for my future, a future where I would become what they considered a proper wife. After breaking down my resistance to traditional gender roles, they planned to guide me toward what they saw as natural feminine fulfillment. Once Margaret accepts her role as a wife first, she'll be much happier, Mabel had written. I've seen this transformation in dozens of young women over the years. Career obsession is usually just a phase before they find their true calling in family life. The plan included specific milestones, getting me pregnant within 6 months, of quitting work, encouraging me to develop appropriate hobbies like gardening or crafts, gradually expanding my domestic responsibilities until managing Curtis's life became my full-time occupation. They'd even discussed how to handle my potential resistance during the transition. If she gets depressed after giving up work, we'll frame it as post-career adjustment, Luke had suggested. Lots of women go through this. The solution is keeping her busy with family responsibilities until she adjusts to her new role, Chetno had enthusiastically endorsed this timeline. Once she's pregnant, the work obsession will end naturally. Biology will take over where persuasion failed. They'd mapped out my entire future without consulting me, confident that they understood my needs better than I did. They saw my current life as a temporary rebellion that would end once they applied sufficient pressure. Reading their long-term plan was like discovering that strangers had been planning to kidnap me. Except the strangers were my own family. And instead of holding me for ransom, they wanted to hold me forever. Sitting in my kitchen, reading their detailed psychological profile and 10-year plan for my life, I experienced something I'd never felt before. Absolute clarity about who these people really were. They weren't family who disagreed with my choices. They weren't concerned relatives worried about my well-being. They were people who fundamentally believed that I didn't have the right to determine my own life's direction. Every kindness they'd shown me, every moment of apparent support, every family gathering where I'd felt included, it had all been performance, designed to keep me compliant while they worked systematically to destroy my independence. The cruelest part was their absolute confidence in their moral authority. They genuinely believed they were helping me by planning to break my spirit. In their minds, my resistance to their vision wasn't legitimate disagreement. It was evidence of confusion that needed correction. That night, I printed every email, every plan, every casual insult disguised as concern. I organized it all into a file I labeled Evidence of Conspiracy. Not for legal purposes, but for my own clarity on the days when I might be tempted to doubt my decision to leave. Because after reading their complete plan for my emotional destruction and lifetime management, I knew there was no possibility of compromise, no hope for mutual respect, no chance that these relationships could ever be healthy. They had shown me exactly who they were, and I had finally seen them clearly. October 10th, 5 days before my birthday, was the day I stopped pretending. There might be another solution. I'd come home early from securing a 6-figure contract with a Berlin tech startup, the kind of success that should have made Curtis proud. Curtis was in the kitchen, talking on his phone with casual cruelty. No, Mom, she doesn't suspect anything. Still thinks her little computer games matter. I froze in the hallway, listening through the crack in the door. The birthday plan is perfect timing, he continued. She's been more confident lately, which means she needs a bigger reality check. By Christmas, she'll be pregnant and this whole career phase will be over. Women always get more realistic once biology kicks in. They laughed together, and the sound was like ice water in my veins. The casual dismissal of my agency and my own reproduction. The assumption that pregnancy would automatically transform me into the compliant wife they wanted. In that moment, listening to my husband and his mother discuss my future like I was livestock being prepared for breeding, I made my final decision. There would be no confrontation, no attempt at communication. They had shown me exactly who they were. Now I would show them exactly who I was. That night, while Curtis slept beside me, I executed the financial strategy I'd been planning for months. Using my laptop and business banking access under my maiden name, I began systematic transfer of my resources. Over the past year, I'd been gradually moving money out of our joint accounts into private business accounts Curtis didn't know existed. Small amounts, carefully timed to look like routine business expenses. Curtis had been so focused on criticizing my work that he'd never bothered to understand how much it actually earned. By dawn, I had consolidated $47,000 in liquid assets. Money Curtis couldn't access, couldn't freeze, couldn't use to control my movements. I also activated international business credit lines I'd been establishing through my consulting work. European banks were remarkably willing to extend credit to American consultants with proven track records. The irony was perfect. While Curtis and his family plotted to make me financially dependent on him, I'd been building financial independence they couldn't even imagine. I prepared a detailed letter explaining my decision to leave, citing specific examples of emotional manipulation and financial deception. I included copies of the emails I'd discovered, creating an irrefutable record of their conspiracy against me. The letter would be mailed to Curtis's lawyer the day after I disappeared. I also drafted a comprehensive divorce petition, complete with evidence of Curtis's financial mismanagement and my own asset documentation. Most importantly, I prepared detailed financial disclosure showing how my income had subsidized Curtis's failing business for 3 years. Margaret Richards would disappear on October 15th. Margaret Smith would begin her new life on October 16th. I'd been laying the groundwork for this transition for months. Business licenses, professional certifications, banking relationships, all established under my maiden name through my consulting work. I updated my passport, established a business address in Switzerland, and secured consultancy contracts worth over $200,000 annually. Most crucially, I secured the contracts that would fund my new life. 3 major European clients had already committed to long-term projects. I would be leaving Curtis's world not as a refugee, but as a successful entrepreneur, with confirmed income and professional standing. By October 14th, I was ready. Emotionally detached from the outcome, financially prepared for independence, and legally protected from retaliation. All I needed was the right moment to make my exit dramatic enough to ensure they would never see me as weak again. Curtis, in Tiao. His infinite arrogance was about to hand me that moment on a silver platter. The 5 days between my decision and my birthday became the most intense period of my life. Every moment had to be perfectly choreographed, every detail planned with military precision. I was preparing not just to leave, but to disappear so completely that they would never be able to find me. My morning routine remained exactly the same. Coffee for Curtis, pleasant conversation about his work schedule, the same smile I'd been wearing for 6 years. But every afternoon, while he was at the construction site, I transformed into someone he'd never met, a woman planning the most elaborate escape in modern relationship history. I systematically photographed every document. I might need birth certificate, social security card, college transcripts, professional certifications, medical records. I uploaded everything to encrypted cloud storage accessible only through accounts Curtis didn't know existed. The originals went into a waterproof envelope hidden in my old college backpack. My digital disappearance required careful orchestration. Over the past months, I'd been gradually shifting my entire online presence away from accounts Curtis could access. New email addresses, new social media profiles, new professional networking accounts, all under my maiden name, all invisible to anyone from my current life. I wiped my laptop's hard drive and installed software that would encrypt everything and route my internet traffic through virtual private networks. If Curtis tried to track my online activity after I left, he would find nothing. My digital footprint would simply stop on October 15th. I created decoy social media activities scheduled to post automatically for weeks after my departure. Pictures from our photo albums, generic status updates about weather and daily life, carefully crafted to suggest I was still living my normal routine. I purchased a new phone under my maiden name and gradually transferred all my important contacts and business relationships to the new number. On October 16th, Margaret Richards's phone would go silent forever, while Margaret Smith's phone would already be fully operational. Creating a secure financial foundation required months of careful maneuvering. I'd been establishing business relationships with European banks since July, using my consulting income to build credibility with international financial institutions. By October, I had business accounts in Switzerland, Germany, and the United Kingdom. I liquidated every asset I could access without triggering suspicion. Jewelry, inherited items, even the modest stock portfolio I'd built from my grandmother's inheritance. Everything convertible to cash was quietly sold and transferred to my international accounts. The most satisfying part was discovering how much money I'd actually saved over the years. While Curtis spent freely on tools, poker games, and weekend trips with his friends, I'd been quietly building emergency funds he'd forgotten existed. My consulting business had been building toward this moment for months without Curtis realizing it. Every new client I secured, every contract I negotiated, every professional relationship I developed was designed to be location-independent and culturally transferable. I spent the week confirming my major contracts and explaining to clients that I would be relocating my operations to Europe for expanded market access. This was received enthusiastically. American marketing expertise was highly valued in European markets. I also secured 3 new major contracts scheduled to begin in November, ensuring that my income stream would actually increase after my departure. Curtis's family had spent months trying to convince me that my work was a hobby that couldn't support me independently. They were about to discover how wrong they'd been. The hardest part wasn't logistical, it was psychological. I had to prepare myself to hurt people I'd once loved, even though they'd been systematically hurting me for years. I wrote letters I would never send, expressing everything I'd wanted to say during 6 years of marriage. The exercise helped me process my emotions without compromising my operational security. The most difficult letter was to Curtis himself. Not an explanation. He didn't deserve my emotional labor, but a legal notification that our marriage was over and that I would be filing for divorce. The letter was cold, factual, and included copies of the emails I'd discovered. On October 14th, the night before my birthday, I lay in bed next to Curtis and smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow, he would drive me to that bus stop thinking he was teaching me humility. Instead, he would be delivering me to my freedom. Every detail was in place, every contingency planned, every bridge prepared for burning. I was ready. October 15th. Dawned clear and cold. I woke up before my alarm, my body electric with anticipation. Curtis was still sleeping, completely unaware that this would be the last morning we would ever share a bed. When Curtis stumbled downstairs, I greeted him with the brightest smile I'd worn in months. "Happy birthday to me," I said cheerfully, setting his coffee mug down exactly where he expected it. "Ready for tonight?" he asked, taking a sip of coffee. "I can't wait," I replied, and for the first time in years, I meant it completely. "I have such a good feeling about today." Curtis looked pleased, probably interpreting my excitement as evidence that their plan was already working. "Mom's really looking forward to it. She has some things she wants to discuss with you. I've been thinking a lot lately about family, about priorities. I think tonight might be exactly what I need." The confusion in his eyes was delicious. He'd expected me to be apprehensive about facing his family's criticism, not genuinely excited about it. While Curtis went to work, I spent my birthday executing the final phase of my escape plan. I confirmed my transportation arrangements, the car service that would pick me up from the bus stop, the overnight train to Chicago, the morning flight to Zurich. My few precious possessions were already secured in a storage unit across town, moved there gradually over the past week in boxes labeled old college stuff that Curtis had helped me carry without suspicion. The house would be left exactly as Curtis expected to find it when he returned. My clothes in the closet, my toiletries in the bathroom, my laptop charging on the kitchen counter. The only things missing would be items so small he might not notice, their absence for days. I spent the afternoon preparing one final surprise, an envelope containing printed copies of every email, every plan, every casual cruelty they'd shared about me. Not as ammunition for revenge, but as evidence that I'd known exactly what they were doing and had chosen my response accordingly. When Curtis came home that evening, I greeted him with enthusiasm that bordered on manic. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, the blue dress he'd complimented months ago, the pearl earrings his mother had given me for Christmas, the wedding ring that would soon become evidence in divorce proceedings. "You look beautiful," he said, genuinely surprised. "I wanted to look special tonight," I replied. "I have a feeling this evening is going to change everything." Mabel's dining room was set like a stage for my execution. The good china, the formal table setting, the careful arrangement of family photos that emphasized traditional gender roles. Every detail designed to reinforce their message about proper feminine priorities. The birthday dinner proceeded exactly as their emails had outlined: casual questions about my work that grew progressively more critical, subtle references to my childlessness, medical advice about stress and fertility, gentle suggestions that I might be happier with different priorities. Responded to each attack with thoughtful consideration, as if I'd never heard these ideas before and found them fascinating. I asked follow-up questions, sought clarification, expressed gratitude for their concern. "You're all so wise," I said during dessert. "I can see why Curtis values your opinions so much. You've given me a lot to think about." Curtis reached over and squeezed my hand, his eyes bright with anticipation of victory. "I told you they care about you, Maggie. We all want what's best for you." "I know," I said softly. "And I think I'm finally ready to accept what that means." The satisfaction around the table was palpable. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd been broken by their coordinated assault on my confidence and independence. They had no idea that, in less than 3 hours, I would vanish from their lives forever, leaving behind only evidence of their conspiracy and the echo of their own arrogance. The final act was about to begin. The rain started just as we left Mabel's house, fat droplets, splashing against the windshield like tears from an angry sky. Curtis was unusually quiet during the drive, his jaw set in that familiar expression of righteous determination. "That was a wonderful evening," I said softly, watching the storm intensify outside. "Your family really opened my eyes tonight." "They care about you, Maggie," he said, his voice carrying that patronizing tone I'd grown to despise. "Sometimes caring means having difficult conversations." "I understand that now," I replied, my voice trembling with what Curtis interpreted as impending surrender. "I've been so selfish, so focused on my own wants instead of what's best for our family." The smile that spread across his face was predatory. This was the moment he'd been building toward for months, the complete acknowledgement of his authority over my choices, my ambitions, my very sense of self. The storm was getting worse, sheets of rain turning the familiar streets into a blurred waterscape. Curtis drove with the confidence of a man who believed he was rescuing me from my own delusions. When Curtis pulled over at the 5th Street bus stop, I felt a strange moment of gratitude. Not for what he was about to do, but for the absolute clarity of his character that this moment would provide. The rain was coming down in torrents now, the kind of storm that soaks through clothing in seconds. The bus stop offered minimal shelter, just a thin metal roof that seemed designed more for aesthetic purposes than actual protection. "Get out," Curtis said, his voice cold with manufactured authority. I turned to look at him, letting confusion and hurt play across my features. "Curtis, what are you doing?" "Teaching you a lesson you should have learned years ago," he replied, his eyes glittering with cruel satisfaction. "Maybe walking home in this storm will help you understand how good you have it." But it's 12 miles, I said, my voice breaking with perfectly calculated desperation. In this weather, Curtis, please, I'm sorry if I upset your family. You didn't mean to be selfish, he interrupted. You didn't mean to prioritize your little hobby over your marriage? Each question was a dagger thrust designed to maximize psychological damage. He wanted me to feel small, helpless, dependent on his mercy for basic safety. I understand now, I whispered, stepping out into the storm. I'll do better, I'll be better. I hope so, he said, already putting the car in drive. For both our sakes. As Curtis's taillights disappeared into the storm, I stood alone at the bus stop and began to laugh. Not the bitter laughter of defeat, but the pure joy of a woman who had just witnessed her husband reveal exactly who he really was. The rain soaked through my birthday dress within seconds, but I felt warmer than I had in years. Every drop that hit my skin washed away another layer of doubt, another moment of wondering whether I was being too harsh in my judgment. Curtis had just provided the perfect punctuation mark to 6 years of subtle emotional abuse. A man who loved. His wife would never leave her stranded in a dangerous storm as punishment for having opinions he disliked. I pulled out the waterproof phone I'd hidden in my purse. The car service I'd arranged was already en route, scheduled to arrive exactly 20 minutes after Curtis's departure. Timing was everything in operations like this. While I waited, I composed a text message to my sister in California. Starting. Over tonight. We'll explain everything soon. I'm safe and I'm free. The message was scheduled to send in 3 hours, after I was safely on the train to Chicago. Miles away, Curtis was probably already on the phone with his mother, reporting the success of their birthday intervention. They thought they understood psychology, thought they knew how to break someone's spirit and rebuild it according to their specifications. By the time Curtis realized I wasn't walking home in the storm, I would be beyond their reach forever. The headlights of my rescue vehicle appeared through the rain exactly on schedule. As I climbed into the warm, dry interior, I felt the last chains of my old life falling away. The storm that Curtis thought would break me had actually been my salvation. They had orchestrated my birthday as the beginning of my complete surrender. Instead, it had become the moment of my complete liberation. As my rescue car pulled away from the bus stop, I allowed myself one moment of pure satisfaction. Curtis thought he had just delivered the decisive blow in his campaign to break my spirit. Instead, he had given me the perfect excuse to disappear forever. The driver, Patricia, handed me a towel without judgment. I'd booked her service specifically, because her reviews mentioned discretion and reliability. Rough night? She asked quietly. Actually, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. It's the best night I've had in years. During the 20-minute drive to the train station, I executed the final phase of my communication strategy. My phone contained pre-written text, messages to everyone who needed to know I was safe, each scheduled to send at carefully calculated intervals over the next 48 hours. The messages would create a trail suggesting spontaneous adventure rather than calculated escape. By the time Curtis realized these were automated, I would be established in my new life with legal residency and professional credentials. At the train station, I completed the most satisfying task of my entire escape, delivering the evidence, package that would shatter Curtis's family's confidence in their psychological warfare. The package contained every email I'd discovered, organized chronologically with highlighted sections showing their coordination. I'd included a detailed timeline showing how their family emergencies had been deliberately scheduled to sabotage my client presentations. Most damning of all, I documented how my income had been subsidizing Curtis's failing business for 3 years. The cover letter was brief and clinical. Curtis, I found your emails. All of them. I know about the birthday intervention plan, the campaign to undermine my business, and your family's coordinated effort to break my spirit. I know about the second mortgage you took on our house without my consent. I am filing for Divorce. I am not hiding from you. I am simply building a life where people like you cannot touch me. Margaret Smith. The use of my maiden name would signal that I wasn't just leaving our marriage. I was erasing every trace of connection to his family. As I settled into my seat on the overnight train to Chicago, I reviewed the financial strategy that had made my escape possible. Curtis and his family had spent months trying to convince me that my work was a hobby that couldn't support me independently. They were about to discover exactly how wrong they'd been. My consulting business had generated over $127,000 in the past year. The European clients I'd been cultivating were already committed to contracts worth $180,000 for the coming year, with options for expansion that could double that amount. While Curtis had been borrowing against our house to fund his failing construction company, I'd been building an international client base that would allow me to work from anywhere in the world. During the 8-hour train ride, I finalized my business transition. My European clients received updates about my accelerated timeline for relocating operations to Switzerland. The response was enthusiastic. American marketing expertise was in high demand. I also activated business relationships I'd been building with Swiss law firms specializing in American expatriate services. By the time my plane landed in Zurich, I would have legal representation, business banking relationships, and temporary housing arrangements all confirmed. The Berlin tech startup offered to sponsor my work visa application and provide long-term office space. What Curtis had dismissed as computer games was actually opening doors to opportunities he could never imagine. As dawn broke over the Illinois countryside, I completed the final step, officially becoming Margaret Smith in every practical sense. My passport, business licenses, banking relationships, and professional credentials were all legitimate and legal. Margaret Richards would simply disappear from all records and databases, while Margaret Smith emerged as a successful international consultant with established credentials and proven expertise. As the train pulled into Chicago's Union Station, I realized that the most difficult part of my escape was over. I had successfully extracted myself from a toxic situation with my dignity, my resources, and my future intact. The woman who stepped off that train was not a victim fleeing abuse, but a successful professional relocating to expand her business opportunities. Curtis had given me the perfect cover story for my disappearance, and I had used his cruelty as the foundation for my freedom. Margaret Smith was ready to conquer Europe. 36 hours after Curtis left me at that bus stop, I was sitting in a first-class cabin 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, sipping champagne and watching the American coastline disappear beneath layers of clouds. The transformation was so complete that I felt like I was witnessing someone else's life. The flight attendant, Sophie, complimented my composure during takeoff. "First time to Europe?" she asked in accented English. "First time to my new life," I replied, surprised by how natural the words felt. The business class ticket had been an indulgence, but also a statement. Margaret Richards had flown economy on the rare occasions Curtis deemed travel worthwhile. Margaret Smith traveled in comfort because she understood that investing in her own well-being was sound business practice. During the 8-hour flight, I finalized my Swiss business registration and confirmed my temporary housing arrangements in Zurich. By the time I landed, Margaret Smith would be a legal resident with confirmed accommodation and active business operations. Landing in Zurich felt like stepping into a different universe. The airport was a monument to Swiss efficiency and cleanliness, everything arranged with precision that reflected the cultural values I hoped to adopt. My temporary housing was a fully furnished studio apartment in Seefeld, a neighborhood overlooking Lake Zurich. The rental had been arranged through a corporate housing service that specialized in international business relocations, lending legitimacy to my story of expanding operations to European markets. Standing at the window, looking out over the lake, toward the Alps in the distance, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete control over my environment. Nobody here knew Margaret Richards. Nobody had opinions about my career choices, my childlessness, or my failure to be properly grateful for male protection. Establishing legal independence required careful coordination with both Swiss and American legal systems. The divorce papers I'd prepared before leaving were filed exactly as scheduled, with service of process handled by a law firm that specialized in international marital dissolution. Curtis's initial response was predictable: confusion, anger, and attempts to portray my departure as evidence of mental instability. His lawyer's letters, forwarded to my Swiss legal representation, alternated between threats and pleas for reconciliation that revealed how little he understood my motivation. The financial disclosure phase would be particularly damaging to Curtis's narrative. My documentation of his business's actual financial condition, combined with evidence of my income contributions, painted a picture that directly contradicted his family's assumptions about our relationship dynamics. Most satisfying was discovering that my departure had triggered financial consequences Curtis hadn't anticipated. Without my income to subsidize his business operations, Richard's construction was facing immediate cash flow problems. Learning to navigate Swiss culture became an unexpected joy rather than a challenge. The directness of Swiss communication, their respect for professional competence regardless of gender, and their assumption that adults were responsible for their own decisions created an environment where I could flourish. My neighbor, Dr. Maria Hoffman, became my informal guide to Swiss social customs. Americans often think we are cold, she explained over coffee. But we simply believe that people should be judged by their capabilities rather than their personal relationships. This philosophy was liberating after years of having my worth evaluated based on my success as Curtis's wife, rather than my achievements as an individual. In Switzerland, nobody cared whether I was married, divorced, or childless. They cared whether I delivered results. I enrolled in German language classes and joined professional networking groups, building social connections based on shared interests and mutual respect rather than family obligations and traditional gender expectations. Despite my complete break from my previous life, I maintained discreet monitoring of Curtis and his family's activities. Not from nostalgia or desire for revenge, but from practical security concerns. The monitoring revealed that Curtis's initial disbelief had evolved into a narrative of victimization. He was telling anyone who would listen that I had suffered some kind of breakdown and abandoned our marriage without explanation. The evidence package I'd left behind was being dismissed as fabricated. Mabel Richards was leading a family campaign to have me declared mentally incompetent, believing this would allow them to access my financial accounts or force my return. Their lawyer had informed them that international law made such efforts practically impossible. Most telling was that none of them had attempted to contact me directly. No emails, no social media messages, no attempts to understand my perspective. They remained convinced that I was the problem, rather than recognizing that their treatment of me had been the cause of my departure. This confirmed what I'd suspected all along. They'd never seen me as a person whose opinions mattered, only as a project that had malfunctioned and needed to be repaired or replaced. My first 3 months in Switzerland taught me that rebuilding a life required more than just changing geography. It demanded a complete reimagining of how I operated in the world. Everything from opening a bank account to registering for health insurance became an education in self-reliance that Curtis's family would never have believed me capable of managing. The bureaucracy that many expatriates found frustrating became my playground. Each form completed, each regulation mastered, each system navigated successfully, was proof that I could handle complexity without a man to help me understand what I was supposedly too delicate to manage alone. My German lessons became more than language acquisition. They were lessons in confidence. Dr. Elizabeth Miller, my instructor, was a retired professor who approached language learning as character development. When you speak German, she told me, you must be direct. German does not permit the apologetic speaking patterns American women often use. She was right. German forced me to state my needs clearly, to express opinions without hedging, to claim space in conversations rather than deferring to others. Learning to say ich brauche, I need, without softening it, was linguistic therapy that extended far beyond vocabulary. Within 6 months, I was conducting client meetings in basic German. "Your accent is terrible," laughed Herr Jakob Brenner, CEO of a Zurich-based marketing firm, "but your confidence is perfect." My consulting practice evolved rapidly once I was physically present in European markets. What had been a successful but limited American operation became a thriving international consultancy that attracted clients. I never could have reached from Curtis's world. The work itself was more intellectually challenging than anything I'd done before. European businesses approached marketing with sophistication that required me to elevate my strategic thinking. Cultural nuance became as important as technical expertise. My breakthrough client was Innovación Barcelona, a Spanish tech company that needed to establish market presence in Germanic countries. Their founder, Carmen Vega, became both a client and a mentor, teaching me how successful European businesswomen navigated professional relationships. "American women apologize too much," Carmen observed during a strategy session. "You say, I think maybe we should consider, when you mean we must do this immediately." European clients prefer directness. They hired you for expertise, not politeness. Under Carmen's guidance, I learned to present recommendations with authority rather than suggestion. Instead of, "What do you think about trying this approach?" I learned to say, "This strategy will increase your market penetration by 30% within 6 months." By my first anniversary in Europe, my client roster included companies in 6 countries. My rates had tripled from my American levels, and I was being invited to speak at international marketing conferences. Curtis had dismissed my work as a hobby, but it had become the foundation of a genuinely impressive career. Building a social life from nothing required skills I'd never developed during my marriage. For 6 years, my social connections had been extensions of Curtis's relationships, his friends' wives, his family members, people who knew me primarily as his appendage. In Switzerland, I had to learn how to make friends as Margaret Smith rather than as Curtis's wife Margaret. The process was both terrifying and exhilarating. My first real friendship developed through my neighborhood gym, where I met Anna Kowalski, a Polish architect who had relocated to Zurich for similar professional reasons. Our friendship began with shared confusion about Swiss social customs and evolved into genuine connection. "You are different from other American women I have met," Anna told me over coffee after our 3rd workout together. "You listen more than you speak, and you ask real questions instead of making conversation." Through Anna, I met her circle of expatriate professionals, engineers, designers, researchers, entrepreneurs who had chosen Switzerland as the place to build ambitious careers. These were people who measured success by professional achievement rather than relationship status, who assumed competence until proven otherwise. For the first time in my adult life, I was part of a social group where my career was seen as an asset rather than a distraction from my primary role as a wife. Living alone for the first time since college taught me things about myself that I'd never had the opportunity to discover. Without Curtis's preferences dictating everything from meal choices to television programming, I began to understand what I actually enjoyed versus what I'd trained myself to tolerate. I discovered that I preferred silence to constant background noise, that I enjoyed cooking complex meals when I wasn't rushing to feed someone else's schedule, that I had opinions about art and literature that I'd never bothered to develop when my intellectual energy was focused on managing Curtis's emotional needs. My apartment became a reflection of my actual taste, rather than a compromise between my preferences and Curtis's demands. Clean lines, natural light, minimal decoration, aesthetic choices that would have been dismissed as cold in my previous life but felt peaceful and authentic. I also discovered physical capabilities I'd never tested. Weekend hiking in the Swiss Alps revealed that I was stronger and more adventurous than I'd believed. The woman who had been too delicate to walk 12 miles in a storm was regularly hiking 20-mile mountain trails. The most difficult aspect of rebuilding was excavating years of accumulated emotional damage and separating Curtis's opinions of me from my actual capabilities. Dr. Sarah Weber, my Swiss therapist, specialized in helping expatriates process the psychological aspects of major life transitions. "You speak about your former husband's views as if they were medical diagnoses," she observed during one session. "He said you were impractical, so you believe you are impractical, despite evidence that you successfully relocated to a foreign country and built a thriving business." The work of distinguishing between Curtis's projections and my actual traits required constant vigilance. Every time I caught myself thinking, "I'm not good at," I had to examine whether that assessment was based on evidence or on years of being told I was insufficient. The breakthrough came during a particularly challenging client negotiation where I successfully secured a contract worth more than Curtis's annual income. Walking out of that meeting, I realized that the woman Curtis had described as impractical and unreliable had just demonstrated sophisticated business acumen. "I am not the person he said I was," I told Dr. Weber the following week. "I never was. He needed me to be small so he could feel large." 18 months into my Swiss life, Carmen Vega from Innovación Barcelona called with a proposal that would test capabilities I'd never known I possessed. Their presentation consultant had backed out of a crucial Milan investor meeting, and they needed someone who understood both American market psychology and European business culture. "The contract is worth 300,000 euros if we secure funding," Carmen explained. In my old life, I would have immediately declined, apologizing for not being qualified. But Margaret Smith had been building confidence for 18 months. "Tell me about the investors," I said instead. What followed was the most intensive week of my professional life. I immersed myself in venture capital psychology, studied the specific investors, and developed a presentation strategy that combined American directness with European sophistication. The work required skills I'd been developing without realizing. Cultural translation, high-stakes communication, strategic narrative development. The Milan presentation was scheduled for a conference room overlooking the fashion district. 5 investors, each representing different European markets, would decide whether to fund Carmen's expansion across 3 countries. Walking into that Milan conference room, I understood something profound about my own capabilities. The woman, who had been dismissed as too emotional for serious business decisions, was about to orchestrate a negotiation involving millions of euros. "Gentlemen," I began in fluent Italian that I'd been secretly perfecting, "Innovación Barcelona represents the convergence of American innovation psychology and European market sophistication." For 90 minutes, I guided the investors through a narrative that connected emotional psychology to market data, cultural trends to profit projections. I answered questions in 3 languages, switching seamlessly between analytical frameworks and intuitive insights. "Miss Smith," said Giuliano Rossi, the lead investor, "your analysis of consumer behavior patterns is remarkably sophisticated. Where did you develop this expertise?" "Through necessity," I replied, which was absolutely true. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from understanding how people respond to unexpected circumstances. Carmen and I walked out with full funding and additional investment opportunities worth over 2 million euros. But more importantly, I walked out knowing that I possessed capabilities that were genuinely exceptional. The Milan success created a cascade of opportunities that transformed my entire business model. Word spread quickly through European venture capital networks about the American consultant who could bridge cultural gaps while delivering sophisticated strategic analysis. Within 6 months, I was no longer doing traditional marketing consulting. I had evolved into something more specialized and valuable, a strategic cultural translator for international business expansion. Companies planning to enter new markets hired me to decode consumer psychology, navigate cultural nuances, and develop communication strategies that worked across multiple countries simultaneously. My rates increased accordingly. Projects that once paid €5,000 now commanded 50,000. The work was more complex, the stakes higher, but my confidence had grown to match the challenges. The most satisfying client was a German automotive company expanding into American markets. Their CEO, Dr. Wolfgang Müller, initially questioned whether an American woman could understand the precision required for German engineering marketing. Dr. Müller, I told him during our first meeting, precision isn't about avoiding emotions in business decisions. It's about understanding exactly which emotions drive purchasing behavior and engineering your strategy accordingly. By the end of our 6-month engagement, their American market penetration had exceeded projections by 40%. Dr. Müller not only renewed my contract, but recommended me to 3 other German companies, describing my work as the most analytically rigorous marketing strategy we have ever implemented. My expertise in cultural business translation led to invitations to speak at international conferences. The first invitation came from the Swiss Business Council for a presentation on American consumer psychology in European markets. Speaking to an audience of 300 business leaders was terrifying until I realized that I had information they needed, insights drawn from years of experience that nobody else possessed. The response was overwhelming. My presentation was rated the highest of the conference, and I received 17 consulting inquiries within a week. This led to regular speaking engagements across Europe. London's International Marketing Summit, Berlin's Innovation Conference, Stockholm's Digital Strategy Forum. Each presentation refined my expertise and expanded my professional network. I was becoming recognized as a thought leader in a field I'd essentially created through necessity and determination. The speaking fees alone were generating more income than my entire consulting practice had earned in America. Curtis had been so wrong about my capabilities that it was almost comical. The woman he'd tried to confine to domestic roles was commanding audiences of international business leaders. Recognition from business media followed naturally from my speaking success. Harvard Business Review published my article on cultural bridge strategies for global market entry. The Financial Times featured my analysis of American tech companies' European expansion failures. Forbes included me in their 30 under 40 international consultants to watch list. Each publication opportunity reinforced what I'd learned about my own capabilities. I could synthesize complex information quickly, communicate sophisticated concepts clearly, and provide insights that experienced business leaders found valuable. These weren't skills Curtis or his family had ever acknowledged, because they'd never bothered to look for evidence of my intelligence. The media attention also provided security. As my professional reputation became established and publicly documented, it became increasingly difficult for anyone from my past to dismiss my success as temporary or insignificant. Margaret Smith was becoming a recognized expert whose opinions carried weight in international business circles. By my second anniversary in Switzerland, I had become someone I might not have recognized during my marriage. Professionally accomplished, financially independent, intellectually confident, and emotionally self-sufficient, Margaret Smith was everything Margaret Richards had been prevented from becoming. The most profound change was internal. I no longer questioned my own judgment or sought external validation for my decisions. When business opportunities arose, I evaluated them based on strategic merit, rather than wondering whether I was qualified. When challenges emerged, I approached them as problems to be solved rather than evidence of my inadequacy. Curtis and his family had spent years trying to convince me that my ambitions were unrealistic, that my capabilities were limited, that my success was temporary or accidental. Living in Switzerland had proven that every one of their assessments had been wrong. I wasn't the person they'd described, and I never had been. I was the person I became when nobody was actively working to diminish me. 2.5 years after leaving Curtis at that bus stop, I received an offer that would have been inconceivable in my previous life. Henrik Larsson, CEO of Nordic Dynamics, one of Europe's largest consulting firms, wanted to hire me as their director of international strategy. "Margaret," he said during our lunch meeting overlooking Lake Zurich, "we've been watching your work for 18 months. Your cultural bridge methodology has become the gold standard for European companies entering American markets. We want to bring that expertise in-house." The salary offer was staggering, more than Curtis had ever earned in his best year, with equity stakes and performance bonuses that could multiply that amount significantly. But more than the money, the position represented recognition that I had developed expertise that major corporations considered invaluable. "I'm honored," I replied, "but I need to understand why you believe my approach is scalable to enterprise level." Henrik smiled. "Because you've proven something most consultants can't. That cultural translation isn't just about language or customs. It's about understanding the psychological frameworks that drive decision-making in different markets. That insight is worth millions to our clients." Joining Nordic Dynamics meant learning to lead teams rather than working independently. My first assignment was restructuring their North American expansion strategy for 3 major clients simultaneously, a challenge that required coordinating analysis across multiple markets, currencies, and regulatory environments. My team included 12 analysts from 7 countries, each bringing different cultural perspectives and professional backgrounds. During my marriage, Curtis had insisted I wasn't leadership material because I asked too many questions instead of giving direct orders. In the corporate environment, those questions became my greatest strength. "Margaret doesn't just delegate tasks," observed Anna Christensen, my lead analyst. "She helps us understand why each analysis matters to the bigger picture. That makes the work more intelligent instead of just more efficient." Within 6 months, our division's client satisfaction scores had increased 40%, and our project completion times had improved by 25%. Henrik began featuring our methodologies in Nordic Dynamics marketing materials, positioning the company as the leader in cross-cultural business strategy. My corporate success attracted attention from international business media. The Harvard Business Review featured my approach to cultural strategy in their cover story on the future of global business consulting. The Wall Street Journal interviewed me about American companies' European expansion failures, quoting my analysis extensively. Smith's framework represents a fundamental shift in how we think about international market entry, wrote Dr. James Morrison in his Financial Times column. Instead of treating cultural differences as obstacles to overcome, she demonstrates how they become competitive advantages when properly understood. This media recognition elevated my professional status beyond Nordic Dynamics. I was invited to join the World Economic Forum's Global Strategy Council, serve on Harvard Business School's International Advisory Board, and speak at the Munich Security Conference about economic cooperation strategies. Curtis had once told his family that my work was just computer games that didn't qualify as real business expertise. Now global leaders were implementing strategies I'd developed, and international institutions were seeking my guidance on economic policy. Professional recognition translated directly into financial independence that exceeded my most optimistic projections. My Nordic Dynamics salary, combined with speaking fees, consulting retainers, and equity stakes in companies I'd advised, generated wealth that transformed my relationship with money itself. I was no longer budgeting carefully or justifying expenses to anyone. When I wanted to spend a weekend in Paris, I booked first-class tickets without checking prices. When I saw artwork I admired, I purchased it because I enjoyed it. When friends needed financial support, I could provide it without impacting my own security. The apartment I purchased in Zurich's most exclusive neighborhood would have cost more than Curtis made in 5 years. The financial advisor who helped structure my investments managed portfolios for European nobility and technology executives. I had achieved the kind of financial independence that made me genuinely untouchable by people who might want to control my choices. Success at this level required personal growth that extended far beyond professional capabilities. I was now responsible for strategies that affected thousands of employees and millions in revenue. The decisions I made influenced market entries, product launches, and corporate expansions across multiple continents. The pressure was intense, but it revealed reserves of composure and analytical clarity that I'd never had the opportunity to develop during my marriage. When major clients threatened to cancel contracts over strategic disagreements, I remained calm and focused on data-driven solutions. When team conflicts arose, I addressed them directly rather than avoiding confrontation. You have unusual emotional intelligence for someone in strategic roles, observed Dr. Elizabeth Weber during one of our sessions. You can disagree with people without making them feel attacked, which allows for more honest analysis of complex problems. This combination of analytical rigor and emotional intelligence became my signature leadership style. Teams trusted my judgment because I consistently demonstrated that my decisions were based on evidence rather than ego, and clients valued my insights because I could deliver difficult truths without damaging relationships. The woman Curtis had described as too emotional for serious business decisions was now making strategic choices that influenced international markets and corporate valuations. His assessment had been exactly backward. My emotional intelligence was precisely what made me effective at the highest levels of business strategy. Curtis and his family had fundamentally misunderstood what strength looked like. They'd confused emotional intelligence with weakness, collaborative leadership with indecision, and strategic thinking with impracticality. Every quality they'd tried to diminish had become the foundation of my success. 3 years into my Swiss life, I met someone who would change my understanding of what partnership could look like. Dr. Aleandro was presenting at the same international strategy conference in Vienna, where I was delivering the keynote address on cultural bridge methodologies. Alessandro's presentation on sustainable technology implementation was brilliant, analytically rigorous but accessible, data-driven but emotionally intelligent. During the coffee break, he approached me with a question that revealed how carefully he'd been listening. Miss Smith, your framework for cultural translation seems applicable beyond business contexts. Have you considered how these principles might apply to environmental policy coordination between countries with different economic priorities? The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. We missed the afternoon sessions entirely, too engaged in exploring the intersection of cultural psychology and environmental strategy to notice time passing. For the first time since leaving Curtis, I was talking to someone who enhanced my thinking rather than diminishing it. You have an unusual ability to synthesize complex systems, Alessandro observed as we walked along the Danube at sunset. Most consultants specialize. You seem to understand how different types of complexity interact with each other. Our professional collaboration began before any personal relationship developed. Alessandro's environmental consulting firm was struggling to implement sustainability initiatives across European markets, with vastly different regulatory frameworks and cultural attitudes toward environmental responsibility. Traditional environmental consulting treats resistance as ignorance, he explained during our first formal meeting. But your cultural bridge methodology suggests that resistance often comes from legitimate concerns that haven't been properly addressed. Working together, we developed an integrated approach that combined environmental science with cultural psychology. Instead of imposing uniform sustainability standards, we created adaptive frameworks that achieved environmental goals, while respecting different cultural and economic contexts. Our pilot project with Nordic manufacturing companies exceeded all expectations. Environmental compliance increased 60%, but more importantly, employee engagement with sustainability initiatives doubled because the programs aligned with cultural values rather than conflicting with them. You've revolutionized how we think about environmental implementation, said Dr. Lars Johansson, CEO of our largest client. This isn't just better environmental policy, it's better business strategy. What attracted me to Aleandro wasn't his professional success. I had achieved my own financial independence and career recognition. It was his intellectual curiosity and emotional maturity. He asked questions because he wanted to understand, not because he was testing my knowledge. He challenged my ideas because he respected my thinking enough to engage with it seriously. You think differently than anyone I've met, he told me during a weekend hiking trip in the Dolomites. You see patterns that connect things most people treat as separate. It's remarkable. More importantly, Aleandro understood that my career wasn't a phase I would outgrow or a hobby that competed with more important priorities. He was genuinely proud of my achievements and interested in my work for its own merit, not for how it reflected on him. When I told him about my previous marriage and the reasons I'd left America, his response revealed everything I needed to know about his character. Curtis sounds like a man who needed you to be small so he could feel large, Aleandro said quietly. That's not love. That's insecurity using love as camouflage. Aleandro and I developed a relationship based on mutual respect and shared intellectual engagement. We consulted each other on professional decisions not because we needed permission, but because we valued each other's insights. We supported each other's career ambitions because we understood that individual success strengthened rather than threatened our partnership. You're different with him, observed Anna Kowalski during one of our regular coffee meetings. More yourself, if that makes sense. With Curtis, you were always performing some version of a wife. With Aleandro, you're just Margaret. The difference was profound. With Curtis, I had constantly monitored my behavior to avoid triggering his insecurities or his family's disapproval. With Aleandro, I could express opinions, pursue opportunities, and make decisions without worrying about how they would impact someone else's ego. When Nordic Dynamics offered me a promotion that would require extensive travel, Aleandro's response was immediate. That's an incredible opportunity. How can I support you in making it work? Curtis would have found reasons why the travel was impractical, why the additional responsibility was too stressful, why the promotion would damage our relationship. Aleandro helped me strategize how to excel in the new role while maintaining the parts of our life together that we both valued. Our relationship evolved naturally into a true partnership, two successful individuals who enhanced each other's lives without sacrificing their individual identities. We maintained separate apartments but spent most evenings together. We collaborated professionally when projects aligned but respected each other's independent work. You've found something rare, observed Dr. Sarah Weber during one of our sessions. A relationship that adds to your life without subtracting from your autonomy. That's what healthy partnership looks like. The contrast with my marriage to Curtis was striking. Curtis had wanted a wife who would orbit around his needs and ambitions. Aleandro wanted a partner who would journey alongside him while pursuing her own path. After 2 years together, Aleandro proposed during a business trip to Tokyo. I want to build a life with you, he said simply. Not because I need you to complete me, but because I admire who you are and want to share adventures with the most interesting person I've ever met. Yes, I replied without hesitation. But I want to keep my name. He laughed. Margaret Smith is a powerful brand. Why would you change it? The wedding was small and elegant, a ceremony in the mountains above Zurich with friends who celebrated our partnership as equals. No family politics, no traditional gender expectations, no performance of roles we didn't genuinely want to play. Standing. At the altar, exchanging vows with someone who truly saw and valued me, I thought about the woman who had stood in a thunderstorm 4 years earlier. She could never have imagined that her worst moment would lead to her best life. Curtis had been right about one thing. Marriage did change me, but not in the way he'd intended. With Aleandro, I discovered what it meant to be truly known by another, person. He understood my ambitions, respected my independence, and celebrated my successes without feeling diminished by them. Our relationship was built on genuine partnership rather than traditional gender roles or power dynamics. The life we built together was everything I'd never known I wanted: professionally fulfilling, emotionally satisfying, and completely authentic. We traveled for business and pleasure, collaborated on projects that combined our expertise, and maintained individual friendships and interests that enriched rather than threatened our partnership. Most importantly, Aleandro never tried to change me or manage my choices. He had fallen in love with Margaret Smith, the successful, independent, intellectually curious woman I had become, not with some diminished version he thought I should be. This was what partnership looked like when both people were whole, complete, individuals who chose to share their lives rather than trying to complete each other. It was everything my marriage to Curtis had never been and could never have become. 4 years after leaving Curtis at that bus stop, I stood on the stage of the World Economic Forum in Davos, accepting the International Business Innovation Award for my work in cultural strategy development. The ceremony was being broadcast to business leaders across 6 continents, but the moment felt surreal, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. Margaret Smith has fundamentally changed how multinational corporations approach market expansion, announced Klaus Schwab, the forum's founder. Her methodologies have generated over $2 billion in successful international ventures and prevented countless costly cultural misunderstandings. Aleandro sat in the front row, his smile radiating genuine pride. Behind him, I could see Henrik Larsson from Nordic Dynamics, Carmen Vega from Barcelona, and dozens of clients and colleagues who had become genuine friends rather than professional contacts. These were people who knew and respected Margaret Smith, the woman I had become, not the diminished version Curtis had tried to maintain. As I accepted the Crystal Award, I thought about the woman who had stood in that storm 4 years earlier, clutching a waterproof phone and waiting for her escape car. She could never have imagined this moment, this recognition, this complete transformation of identity and purpose. The success of my cultural strategy framework led to a feature profile in Fortune magazine titled "The American Who Conquered European Business." The article traced my professional evolution from freelance designer to international strategy consultant, positioning me as an example of successful reinvention in the global economy. Smith represents a new type of business leader, the article concluded. One who succeeds through synthesis rather than specialization, through cultural intelligence rather than technical dominance. Her success suggests that the future of international business belongs to those who can bridge differences rather than impose uniformity. The article's publication triggered a flood of speaking invitations, consulting requests, and collaboration proposals. Universities wanted me to develop curriculum for international business programs. Governments sought my advice on economic cooperation strategies. Venture capital firms requested my analysis of cross-cultural market opportunities. More personally satisfying was the response from other women who had read about my transformation. Hundreds of emails arrived from women trapped in diminishing relationships, seeking advice about escaping situations that mirrored my former life. Many had discovered the article through online searches about divorce, financial independence, or starting over in midlife. Nordic Dynamics' success with my cultural strategy division attracted acquisition interest from several multinational consulting firms. When McKinsey & Company made an offer to purchase our entire division, Henrik asked me to lead the negotiation process. "This is your intellectual property, Margaret," he said during our strategy meeting. "You should control how it's valued and integrated." The negotiation process revealed how completely my professional identity had evolved. I was no longer the woman who apologized for taking up space in business meetings or questioned whether her insights were valuable. I presented my division's methodology, client results, and growth projections with the confidence of someone who understood exactly what she had built. "Miss Smith, said Rebecca Chen, McKinsey's senior partner. Your approach to cultural strategy represents the most innovative framework we've seen in international consulting. We're prepared to offer terms that reflect both current value and future potential. The final acquisition price exceeded €50 million, with performance bonuses that could double that amount over 5 years. My personal equity stake would make me financially independent beyond anything I had previously imagined possible. Financial success at this level created opportunities for impact that extended beyond business consulting. Aleandro and I established the Toretti Smith Foundation, focused on supporting women's economic empowerment in developing markets. Our approach combined my expertise in cultural strategy with his environmental sustainability knowledge. Traditional development aid often fails because it ignores cultural context, I explained, during our foundation's launch event in Geneva. We're funding initiatives that respect local values while creating genuine economic opportunities for women. Our first project supported women entrepreneurs in rural Morocco, providing business training that incorporated Islamic principles and family structures rather than conflicting with them. The success rate exceeded traditional microfinance programs by 40%, proving that cultural sensitivity enhanced rather than hindered economic development. The foundation work provided personal satisfaction that pure business success couldn't match. These were women escaping economic dependence, building financial independence, creating opportunities for their daughters that previous generations couldn't have imagined. In many ways, their journeys paralleled my own transformation, just in different cultural and economic contexts. By my 4th anniversary in Switzerland, Margaret Smith had become more than a professional identity. She was my complete authentic self. The woman who had once apologized for having career ambitions was now shaping international business strategy. The wife who had been dismissed as impractical was now managing multi-million-dollar corporate initiatives. The most profound change was internal. I no longer compared my life to what it had been during my marriage to Curtis. That period felt like something that had happened to a different person, a character in a story I had read rather than lived. Margaret Richards had been a performance. Margaret Smith was reality. You've become who you were always meant to be, Aleandro observed during a quiet evening at our apartment. Curtis didn't prevent you from becoming successful. He prevented you from discovering that you already were successful. The observation was accurate. My capabilities hadn't suddenly appeared when I moved to Switzerland. They had been present. During my marriage, suppressed and redirected into managing Curtis's emotional needs rather than pursuing my own professional development. Curtis had been wrong about everything: my intelligence, my competence, my potential for independence. But his wrongness had become my freedom. His inability to see my worth had forced me to discover it for myself. Standing on our balcony overlooking Lake Zurich, holding the business journal that featured my latest strategic analysis, I realized something profound. I was grateful for that storm. Not because Curtis had been right to abandon me, but because his cruelty had finally given me permission to abandon him. The woman who stepped out of that car 4 years ago had been his victim. The woman who thrived in Switzerland was her own creation. 4.5 years after leaving Curtis at that bus stop, I received an email that stopped me cold. It wasn't from Curtis himself, but from someone I'd never expected to hear from again. Andy Rogers, one of his closest friends and co-conspirators in their birthday intervention plan. Margaret, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to tell you something important. Curtis is in serious trouble, and it's connected to some business dealings that involve your old house. My lawyer says you might have legal exposure. Please call me. I stared at the email for several minutes, feeling emotions I thought I'd moved beyond. Not sympathy for Curtis, but a sharp reminder of the life I'd escaped and the people who had tried to control it. Andy Rogers reaching out after years of silence felt like a ghost materializing in my pristine new existence. Alessandro found me reading the message for the third time when he returned from his morning run. "Bad news?" he asked, noting my expression. "News from my past," I replied, handing him my phone. "The question is whether it's my problem anymore." After reading Andy's message, Alessandro sat beside me on our apartment's terrace. "What does your instinct tell you?" "That Curtis has probably made the legal and financial disasters I left behind even worse," I said. "And that Andy wouldn't contact me unless he needed something, not to warn me about something." Despite my reluctance to re-engage with anyone from my former life, the mention of legal exposure demanded investigation. I contacted my Swiss lawyer, Dr. Petra Zimmermann, who specialized in international asset protection for expatriate professionals. "We should determine your actual exposure before responding to this contact," Dr. Zimmermann advised. "If there are legitimate legal concerns, ignorance won't protect you. If there aren't, knowledge will empower you to respond appropriately." Within 48 hours, Dr. Zimmermann's American legal partners had conducted a comprehensive investigation of Curtis's current situation. The results were worse than I'd imagined, but also more revealing about the people I'd escaped. Richard's Construction had filed for bankruptcy 8 months earlier. The house Curtis and I had shared, which should have been sold as part of our divorce settlement, had been lost to foreclosure. But the most disturbing discovery was that Curtis had been forging my signature on documents for years, including business loans and tax filings that created potential liability under my maiden name. "He's been using your identity to avoid responsibility for debts incurred after your divorce," Dr. Zimmermann explained. "The forgeries are obvious to forensic analysis, but dealing with them will require active legal intervention." Armed with complete information about Curtis's misconduct, I decided to respond to Andy Rogers, but on my terms, with full legal protection and clear objectives. Dr. Zimmermann arranged for the call to be recorded and participated as my legal representative. "Andy," I said when he answered, "I received your email. Before we discuss Curtis's situation, I need you to understand that any conversation we have is being documented for legal purposes." There was a long pause. "Margaret, I just thought you should know—" "Andy, let me be clear about something," I interrupted. "I know about the forged signatures, the fraudulent business loans, and the tax documents Curtis filed using my identity. I know about the bankruptcy, the foreclosure, and the creditors who are looking for assets to satisfy his debts. What I don't know is why you think any of this is my responsibility." Another pause. Longer this time. "Look, Margaret, we all know you did well for yourself after you left. Curtis is in a bad place, and some of you thought, I might bail him out?" I asked, genuinely incredulous. "The same group of people who spent years trying to convince me I was too incompetent to manage my own career?" "That's not fair, Margaret. We were trying to help you understand." "You were trying to control me," I corrected. "There's a difference. Dr. Zimmermann, would you please explain Mr. Rogers about the legal consequences of identity fraud?" What followed was 20 minutes of Dr. Zimmermann methodically explaining how Curtis's use of my identity constituted multiple felonies, how the statute of limitations worked for financial fraud, and how my documented departure from the United States before the fraudulent activities began actually strengthened rather than weakened my legal position. "Mr. Rogers," Dr. Zimmermann concluded, "your friend's financial problems are entirely of his own making. Ms. Smith has no legal obligation to assist him, and given his fraudulent use of her identity, she would be well within her rights to pursue criminal charges." Andy's response revealed everything I needed to know about how little had changed in his thinking. "Come on, Margaret. You can't seriously be considering sending Curtis to prison over some paperwork mistakes. He's struggling. And you're obviously doing fine." "Paperwork mistakes?" I repeated. "Andy, he forged my signature on tax documents and business loans for years after our divorce. That's not paperwork mistakes. That's identity theft and fraud." "But you don't need the money," Andy continued, as if my financial independence somehow obligated me to cover Curtis's criminal behavior. You're successful now. This would destroy him. The conversation crystallized everything I'd learned about these people during my marriage and confirmed why leaving had been necessary rather than optional. Even now, facing clear evidence of Curtis's criminal behavior, Andy's primary concern was protecting Curtis from consequences rather than acknowledging the violation of my rights. Andy, I said finally, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Curtis's problems are not my problems. His financial failures are not my responsibility. His criminal behavior is not my fault. And his need for money does not create any obligation for me to provide it. But, Margaret, I'm not finished, I continued. 4.5 years ago, Curtis left me at a bus stop in a thunderstorm because he thought I needed to learn humility and gratitude. Today, you're calling me because he needs money to solve problems created by his own illegal actions. Do you see the irony here? There was silence on Andy's end of the call. Dr. Zimmerman will be filing a complaint with the FBI regarding the identity fraud, I continued. Curtis will need to hire his own lawyer to deal with the consequences of his choices. I will not be bailing him out, covering his debts, or taking responsibility for problems I didn't create. Margaret, please. Andy, I have a helicopter to catch, I said, which was actually true. Aleandro and I were flying to Munich for a business meeting. I suggest you tell Curtis to find a good criminal defense attorney. I hung up the phone and realized I felt nothing. No anger, no guilt, no satisfaction. Curtis and his problems had become completely irrelevant to my life. The woman he'd tried to break had grown beyond his ability to touch. 6 months after Andy Rogers's phone call, I found myself in a situation that would have been impossible to imagine during my marriage to Curtis. Aleandro and I were flying to a business meeting in a private helicopter when severe weather forced an emergency landing. The pilot identified a construction site as the safest available landing zone. As we descended through the storm clouds, I noticed something familiar about the industrial landscape below. The half-completed buildings, the scattered equipment, the unmistakable signs of a project running behind schedule and over budget. This was exactly the kind of construction site Curtis had always struggled to manage efficiently. That's going to be an interesting landing, Aleandro observed, watching workers scatter as our helicopter approached their work zone. What happened next felt like the universe completing a circle I'd never expected to see closed. As we touched down, I saw him, Curtis Richards, wearing a hard hat and high-visibility vest, standing among a group of workers who were pointing up at our helicopter with expressions of curiosity and confusion. 4.5 years after leaving me at a bus stop in a storm, he was watching me land from the sky. The recognition was instant and mutual. Even from across the construction site, I could see the exact moment when Curtis realized who was stepping out of the helicopter. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and something that looked like fear. Margaret? Aleandro asked quietly as we waited for the storm to pass. That's Curtis, I confirmed, watching my former husband stand frozen among his workers. The irony was perfect. Curtis had left me stranded in a storm thinking he was teaching me about powerlessness and dependence. Now I was arriving from the sky while he stood in the mud of a failing construction project, watching the woman he'd tried to break demonstrate exactly how far she'd risen above his reach. Curtis approached our helicopter hesitantly, like someone approaching a dangerous animal. He looked older, grayer, worn down by the years of financial struggle and legal problems that had followed my departure. The confident man who had abandoned me with such casual cruelty had been replaced by someone who moved with the uncertainty of repeated failure. Margaret, he said when he reached speaking distance. What are you doing here? Emergency landing, I replied calmly. Weather's too dangerous to continue flying. Curtis glanced at the helicopter, at Aleandro, at my obviously expensive clothing, and back at my face. I could see him trying to process the reality of what he was witnessing. The woman he'd dismissed as impractical and dependent was traveling by private helicopter while he struggled to manage a basic construction project. "This is your helicopter?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. "It's chartered," I replied. "We're flying to a business meeting in Munich." The word "we" seemed to hit him like a physical blow. Curtis's eyes moved to Aleandro, taking in his obvious sophistication and success, then back to me with an expression of dawning comprehension. "You're married," Curtis said, noticing my wedding ring. "I am," I confirmed. "Aleandro, this is Curtis Richards, my former husband. Curtis, this is Dr. Alessandro Toretti, my current husband." Alessandro stepped forward with characteristic European politeness, extending his hand. "Mr. Richards, I've heard about you." Curtis shook Alessandro's hand mechanically, his eyes never leaving my face. "Margaret, I need to tell you something. About the business, about what happened after you left." "Curtis," I interrupted gently, "I know about the bankruptcy, the foreclosure, and the identity fraud. My lawyers handled everything months ago." The color drained from his face. "You know?" "I know everything," I said. "And I want you to understand something important. None of it is my responsibility anymore." Standing in that storm, facing the man who had tried to break my spirit, I realized that I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no desire for revenge. Curtis had become completely irrelevant to my life, a character from a story I'd moved beyond. "I don't understand," Curtis said, his voice carrying the confusion of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally challenged. Where did you?" "I became who I was always capable of being," I replied simply. "You just never bothered to notice." The truth of that statement hung in the air between us. Curtis had never seen my potential because recognizing it would have threatened his need to feel superior. His dismissal of my capabilities had been essential to his self-image as the competent partner in our relationship. "Margaret, I'm sorry," he said finally. "About everything. About that night, about the things I said, about—" "Curtis," I interrupted, "I need you to understand something. Your apology doesn't change anything for me. I'm not angry anymore because you don't matter anymore. What you did gave me permission to discover who I really was." The storm was beginning to clear, and our pilot signaled that we could continue our flight. As we prepared to leave, I looked at Curtis one final time. "I hope you figure out how to build a better life," I said, and meant it. But I won't be part of that process. As our helicopter lifted off, I watched Curtis grow smaller through the window until he disappeared entirely. Alessandro took my hand as we flew toward Munich and our future. "Any regrets?" he asked. "Just one," I replied, smiling. I wish I could thank him. That storm he put me through was the best thing that ever happened to me. The woman who had once been abandoned in a thunderstorm was now flying above the clouds, heading toward a life Curtis could never have imagined and would never be able to touch. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just living well. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.